Don't take software developers out to lunch. Now, this was the opening line of a recent TikTok video I made. And of course, I was talking about the onboarding process when companies onboard new software engineers. And I was talking about how a lot of companies get that process wrong. That's even if they have a process. And this video went on to get much more of a response and much more views than I expected. And the responses ranged from people saying I was wrong to people saying maybe I'm generalizing about software engineers and what they like and what they don't like, all the way to people agreeing and saying that they had their own horror stories about what happened to them during their onboarding process. So stick around, I'll mention some of those later on in the video. Now in the video, I went through some of the common mistakes that I think companies make when onboarding software engineers. Number one, they take the new software developer out to lunch with the entire team on their first day. Number two, they might have some kind of welcome reception or party in the office. And number three, they might even ask you to make a speech in front of everyone on your first day to introduce yourself. Now, my reasons for saying that these things are usually a mistake is because in my experience, developers are on a scale of introversion to extroversion. Developers tend to sit closer to introversion than extroversion on average. Of course, it's a generalization and it doesn't apply in all cases. And then I went on to suggest that companies, instead of generalizing, actually can treat people like individuals and give people a questionnaire before they join, where they can state their preference of what they'd like to do on their first day. So that could be lunch with a team if they're comfortable doing that. That could be getting to know the team over coffee and it's not so intense. And number three, they could just get some kind of welcome gift or voucher, and then they can get to know the team at their leisure in due course. And so that was the basic premise of what I was trying to say. All right, so I just wanted to address some of the different types of comments that I got. First of all. So number one was, are developers in fact introverted? Some people commented saying that I've been a developer for X number of years and I'm perfectly happy to go out to lunch and be extroverted and do all that kind of stuff. So of course, definitely not all developers are introverted, but in my experience of around 20 years or so, developers are typically closer to introversion than extroversion on average. And that's based purely on my kind of anecdotal experience. But like all generalizations, they're not always true. And I've known lots of developers that aren't introverted. They're quite happy to, quite comfortable speaking, and they're quite comfortable socializing, all of that kind of stuff. But I suspect that if you did a personality test on, say, 1,000 salespeople and 1,000 developers, I suspect that you would find the average of the 1,000 salespeople to be much more extroverted than the developers. Now, as I said earlier, I was speaking from my own personal anecdotal experience, but if you are interested, I've put a link in the description to a study, which is a kind of a meta study that looked at a bunch of other studies, and they found a strong correlation between good developers and introversion. So it's not quite the same as what I was saying. I wasn't differentiating between good and bad developers, but they found a slight correlation between good developers and introversion. So I'll put a link to that. You can check it out. I'm not vouching for the quality of the study or necessarily using that as a basis of what I'm saying. It just seemed to marry up with what I'm saying, so I've put it there in case you're interested. Okay, number two, generalizing about developers being slightly more introverted than extroverted. Now, I think when we start talking about generalizing, I think this is where people get a bit confused. Now, I'm not a brain surgeon or a neuroscientist, obviously, but I think generalizing is kind of how human brains work. It's kind of innate. We try to simplify things and look for patterns. If you try to assess every single individual entity that you came across in all aspects of your life on its individual traits and merits, you'd basically be there forever. So, for example, if you see a snake when you're out and about, you might assume that it's dangerous, or generalize that because some snakes are dangerous, this snake could be dangerous, and I'm just going to assume that they're all dangerous and just keep away from it, give it a wide berth. If you're out walking in the woods and you see some mushrooms and you think they'd go nicely with my dinner, again, it's probably best to avoid because some mushrooms are poisonous. It's hard to differentiate between one and the other, and best to just avoid them all unless you really know what you're doing. Now, of course, that snake that you came across or those mushrooms that you saw might be perfectly harmless. Do you want to take the risk? Probably not. Now, where this falls apart is where you have negative, or in some cases even positive, generalizations about groups of people, and these could be considered culturally insensitive. This is not only unpleasant, but it can lead to discrimination. Now, when it comes to these type of generalizations, it's best to challenge them and to treat people like individuals. But there are other cases where even negative generalizations can be considered completely acceptable and appropriate. For example, people from my ethnic background are 6 times more likely to be diabetic. Now, I'm not diabetic. I may never be diabetic, but there'll be probably additional support in the communities, and there'll be additional information translated into different languages to support people from sort of South Asian backgrounds because of the higher incidence of diabetes. There might be additional clinics and other things. Now, as far as I know, nobody considers that to be culturally unacceptable or inappropriate. So whether a generalization is acceptable or not, I think it really depends on the context and requires a bit of cultural awareness and a bit of nuance. So saying all generalizations are bad is in fact a generalization itself, and it's not true. And therefore you get the saying that all generalizations are bad, including this one. Now, I think that saying that certain personality types are attracted to certain professions should not be controversial. For example, who would argue that people who are more extroverted are likely to be more attracted to sales, and people who are more introverted are more likely to be attracted to being a writer, for example? Another example is recruitment consultants. Lots of developers deal with lots of recruitment consultants. I think more extroverted people are more likely to be attracted to becoming a recruitment consultant and working in the industry, having meetings, talking to people, negotiating, phone calls all day long. These things are more likely to accentuate your extroversion as a recruitment consultant. So your personality type might dictate which fields that you're attracted to. Working in those fields may make those characteristics which attracted you into the field in the first place accentuated. In the same way, if you're introverted and you like the idea of sitting quietly solving problems on your own, you might be attracted to the software engineering space, and working in the software engineering space, spending lots of time huddled over your laptop trying to fix bugs is likely to accentuate those characteristics even more. Obviously, you have meetings, obviously you have presentations, you have to deal with people, but you do spend a lot of time writing code, quietly studying, all that kind of stuff. However, introversion is not, in my opinion, necessarily a negative trait. Introversion and extroversion anywhere on the spectrum has pros and cons to both introversion and extroversion. And I think probably at either extremes of that spectrum, there could be problems, but otherwise there's just pros and cons. Anyway, coming back to the crux of my original argument, which is that it's best to treat developers like individuals. When they join, give them a questionnaire, ask them what they want to do on their first day. But I'll make a separate video on what a good onboarding process looks like. For now, let's get back to onboarding disasters, onboarding no-nos. I think another big one is that companies often let somebody join and just completely ignore them. They give them a desk, give them a computer, and basically leave them to it. I think the problem with this approach is that it's maybe not as daunting and not as oppressive as making them make a speech or a presentation, but it kind of sets a poor tone. And I think if you join a company and you're basically left to your own devices, you have to find out everything yourself, get introduced to everyone yourself, get access to all the systems yourself. I think it just leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth and sets a poor tone for the rest of your project. All right, so now let's just quickly talk about a few of the onboarding horror stories that other people mentioned from projects that they've started. So I had one person tell me that they were asked to sing on their first day. So on the first day of their new project, they were asked to get on stage and sing. Another person was told to dance on their first day of their new project. Now, obviously these ideas are atrocious. They're awful, and I can't think of anything worse. And I kind of imagine that these kind of ideas, they don't come about by accident. They're usually like a committee or a team is sent into a room and asked to come up with some ideas. They don't want to come out empty-handed, so they come out with the most creative and wacky ideas that they can, thinking they'll be a good idea. Not all ideas are good. Not all innovations are good. I'll make a separate video on that at some point. And this is a prime example. It's creative, it's wacky, it's different, but it's utterly stupid. And, I can only imagine the pain that these people suffered on their first day. My recommendation is if you go to a new company, you got onboarded onto a new project and they ask you to sing or dance on your first day, just turn around and walk out and don't look back. That's not the kind of place you want to be working. All right, so that pretty much sums up this video. We'll touch on this subject again, but if you have any interesting onboarding experience stories, if you've joined a company and they did something terrible or they did something wonderful, please let me know in the comments below. Maybe I can incorporate that in my subsequent video about what good onboarding looks like and what, how they can avoid a terrible onboarding. So let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, hit like. If you didn't like the video, hit like in an ironic way. And don't forget to subscribe for more similar content. All right, thank you for watching.